The guard's finger hovered on the trigger. Back off. Now. Emily raised her hand slowly, voice shaking. Please, we're just trying to get help. But mercy didn't come. The taser crackled, and in one instant, everything stopped. David, a Marine veteran with one leg, fell to the ground as his wife convulsed beside him on the ER pavement. He couldn't lift her, couldn't shield her, couldn't run, but he could speak. And with a voice calm as steel, he said 6 words that would unravel everything. I'm sorry, sir, but you just made a mistake. That moment would silence the hospital. It would trigger a full investigation, and it would remind the country what true strength really looks like. David McAllister was never one to complain. Even as a boy growing up in rural Ohio, life had taught him that hardship wasn't something you talked about. It was something you carried quietly and with dignity. When his father walked out without warning, David was only 12. His younger siblings, Rachel and Danny, were just 6 and 4 at the time. That day, he went from being a kid to being the man of the house. He learned to cook simple meals, pack lunches, and later work odd jobs after school. His mother, a tired but fierce waitress with arthritis in both knees, did everything she could. But it was David who held the little family together. The Marines weren't just a career choice, they were a way to give his siblings a shot at a better life. He enlisted at 19, and by 24, he was a squad leader in Afghanistan. He was sharp, calm under pressure, and had a natural sense for leadership that others respected. But during his 3rd tour, just 3 weeks before coming home, a roadside IED changed everything. The explosion took his left leg below the knee and left him unconscious, buried in dust, blood, and silence. When he woke up in a field hospital 2 days later, the leg was gone, and so was the man he used to be. What followed was 14 months of surgeries, rehab, and the kind of pain no one prepares you for. Phantom pain, they called it. Pain in a part of the body that no longer existed. It was like a ghost that never left him, burning, stabbing, twisting in the middle of the night when he just wanted to breathe. But even in the darkest moments, there was one person who never let go: Emily. Emily McAllister, then Emily Vargas, was a kindergarten teacher with a laugh that warmed every room. They met at a July 4th barbecue 2 weeks before his final deployment. She wasn't impressed by uniforms or titles. She noticed the way David helped a little boy who'd scraped his knee, how he spoke gently, and waited for the child to calm down before wiping away the blood. That quiet kind of strength, that's what drew her in. They wrote letters while he was overseas. No emails, no calls, just pen and paper, old school. When he returned missing a limb and carrying invisible wounds, she didn't flinch. Instead, she ran toward him at the airport, crying, holding on to what was left and everything that still remained. He proposed 3 days later, right in baggage claim, on one knee, his only knee. They married the next spring, and Emily became more than just his wife. She became his nurse, his driver, his anchor. She moved them close to the VA center. She researched prosthetics, sat through hours of medical consults, and learned how to manage his medications better than most nurses. When David fell into depression, when the pain grew too much and the silence in his head turned dark, Emily didn't leave. She sat beside him on the bathroom floor when he broke down. She read his journals when he couldn't find the words himself. And somehow, through it all, she still taught kindergarten by day, smiling at kids who didn't know that their teacher went home each night to bathe and bandage her husband's missing leg. They had been married for 10 years now, 10 years of challenges and choosing each other again and again. David had lost a leg, but in Emily, he found something even more critical, a reason to stand. It started with a dull ache, nothing David McAllister hadn't dealt with before. Phantom pain was a familiar torment, one he had learned to live with through clenched teeth and silent nights. But this time, it came like a storm, unrelenting and cruel. By the 3rd night, he hadn't slept more than 2 hours. The pain had climbed from a nagging throb to an invisible fire raging through the space where his leg used to be. Emily had begged him to go to the hospital that morning, but David had waved her off the same way he had dozens of times before. "It'll pass," he muttered, gritting his teeth while trying to make breakfast. But halfway through buttering a piece of toast, he collapsed onto the kitchen floor, crutches skidding out from under him, plates smashing into pieces. That was it. Emily didn't wait for him to object again. She helped him up slowly and gently, her hands trembling despite her practiced movements. She got him into their old Honda Civic, sliding the seat all the way back to give his prosthetic room, though he wasn't wearing it tonight. The pain was too much. He couldn't even tolerate the touch of a sock. Lincoln County Medical Center was 15 miles away, the closest ER open, late on a Saturday night. Emily didn't speak much during the drive. Her eyes stayed on the road, but every red light felt like a lifetime. When she glanced over, she saw David gripping the door handle so tightly his knuckles were white. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool spring air, and he was barely holding back the groans rumbling in his throat. When they finally pulled into the hospital lot, the main entrance looked impossibly far away. The ER was crowded as usual, dozens of cars packed into every slot. Emily circled twice before spotting a loading zone clearly marked for emergency drop-off only. It wasn't meant for long-term parking, but at that moment protocol wasn't her concern, David was. She parked the car and rushed around to the passenger side, grabbing his crutches from the back seat. David tried to wave her off, insisting he could stand on his own, but his jaw was locked with pain and his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Emily steadied him as he slid out of the seat, his face pale and drawn. Each movement sent another ripple of agony through his body. He bit down hard to keep from crying out. Emily kept one arm around his waist and whispered, "Just get to the door. I'll move the car after, I promise." David nodded weakly, letting her guide him across the pavement. Every step on the crutches was a mountain. His pride wanted to resist, but his body had already surrendered. They didn't notice the security guard right away. Didn't see him standing near the ER entrance, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. They were focused on something far more urgent, survival dignity, and just getting through one more night. Officer Gene Creighton wasn't always this bitter, but somewhere along the line the world had stopped saluting him, and he never forgave it. He had served 8 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq. He liked to mention it whenever he could. But the uniform came off hard. He didn't leave on his own terms. A back injury and an incident with a commanding officer had left his record tarnished and his career cut short. What followed was a string of jobs where his authority didn't carry much weight: parking enforcement, private mall security, overnight warehouse patrol. The badge never felt heavy enough. That's why he clung to this job like it meant something. Now 43, Creighton stood outside Lincoln County Medical Center's emergency entrance in a black windbreaker with security printed across the chest in bold white letters. His gut pressed against his duty belt, and the taser at his side gave him a sense of control he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't in uniform anymore, but he still wanted people to treat him like he was. And tonight he saw an opportunity. He spotted Emily's car the moment it pulled into the loading zone. His eyes narrowed as she helped her husband from the passenger seat, the man visibly struggling on crutches. Creighton didn't care. Rules were rules, and enforcing them loudly gave him the only satisfaction he had left. He strode forward, clipboard in hand, already scribbling a citation before they'd taken 5 steps. "Ma'am," he barked, "this zone is for active drop-off only. Do you have a hospital-issued permit, or are you just ignoring the sign?" Emily turned, startled. "I'm helping my husband in. He's in pain," and Creighton cut her off. "That's not an answer. You can't leave your vehicle here without clearance. Move it, now." David, panting from the short walk, raised a trembling hand. "Sir, I'm a Marine Corps veteran. We're here for emergency care. I just need a moment to—" "You need a moment?" Creighton snapped, taking a step closer. "Buddy, I've seen your type. Everyone thinks they deserve a medal and a parking space just 'cause they served. Newsflash, we all did our time. That doesn't make you special." Emily's eyes flared. "He lost his leg overseas. He's in severe pain. We're just asking for basic human decency." "Basic decency," Creighton sneered, his voice rising. "You think parking wherever you want, ignoring signs, that's decent? You're not above the law. Nobody is." David's fingers curled tighter around the crutch handle. He wasn't looking for a fight, he never did. But the way Creighton spoke to Emily, the way he sneered at his missing leg like it was a personal offense, it lit a fire in his gut. "I'm not asking for special treatment," David said evenly. "I'm just asking you to be human." "Then act like one," Creighton shot back, pointing his pen toward David's prosthetic. "You're not dying. You're just lazy. Move the car or I'll have it towed." The words stung harder than they should have. Not because they were true, but because of how easily someone could dismiss a wound that had once nearly taken David's life. Emily's hands trembled at her sides, her mouth tight with disbelief. "I'll move the car after he's checked in," she said through gritted teeth. "Not before?" Creighton squared up, jaw tight. "Then we have a problem. He didn't see a veteran in pain or a woman trying to help her husband. All he saw were two people defying his authority, and Creighton had made a career of making people regret that. Emily had always been the calm one. In 10 years of marriage through hospital stays, VA paperwork nightmares, and David's darkest days, she had never once raised her voice in anger. But something about the way Officer Creighton dismissed David so casually, so publicly, cut through her composure like a blade. She stepped forward, planting herself between the guard and her husband, her shoulders squared, voice steady but low. "Sir, I'm asking you, please step back. My husband needs emergency care. We're not trying to cause trouble." Creighton crossed his arms, a smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. "Lady, if he needs help, the ER is right there. Go check in and move the car like everyone else. You're not special." Emily inhaled slowly. She could feel the heat in her chest. "You keep saying that like it's a crime to need help. He's a veteran. He served 3 tours. He lost his leg over there." Creighton waved a dismissive hand. "Yeah, well, lots of guys lose things. Doesn't give them a pass to break rules. You can't just park wherever you want because your husband has a sob story and a limp." David shifted behind her, his face pale not just from the pain, but from shame. He hated being the center of this kind of attention. But he also knew Emily wasn't going to back down, not this time. Emily took another step closer, voice rising now. "He's not a sob story. He's a human being who's had to fight for everything, including the right to stand here. And I'm not moving that car until he's inside and registered." Creighton's hand drifted down toward his belt, resting near his holstered taser. "Ma'am, you're becoming agitated. That's disorderly conduct. Don't make this harder than it has to be." People were starting to notice now. A couple who had been walking toward the ER paused at the curb. A teenager in a hoodie pulled out his phone and started recording. 2 nurses in scrubs slowed their pace, watching from the sliding doors just inside. Emily glanced around and saw the shift. Eyes on them. Phones out. The air thickening. Creighton's voice took on a sharper edge. "You have 10 seconds to move your vehicle, or I'll radio for a tow and write you both up for obstruction." David tried to intervene. "Officer, look, I don't want this to go any further. My wife's just trying to help. We'll cooperate, just give us a moment." Creighton turned on him, sneering. "Then control your wife, or I will." That did it. Emily's voice cracked like a whip. "Excuse me," David reached for her arm. "Emily." But she stepped forward again, standing toe-to-toe with the guard now. "Don't you ever talk to him like that. Don't you dare try to intimidate a man who gave up his leg for this country. You're standing there with a taser, and he's standing here with dignity. Who do you think history will remember?" Creighton's face darkened. Enough. More phones came out. The crowd wasn't huge, but it was enough to matter now. A nurse murmured into her walkie. A woman in a floral blouse whispered to her husband, pointing. A quiet buzz of voices began to ripple out across the parking lot. Creighton, feeling the shift in power, doubled down instead of backing off. "Last warning. Back away from me. You're out of line." Emily didn't flinch. "No, we're just done being pushed around." The tension was now thick as concrete. David's jaw clenched. His crutches felt like lead in his hands. He wanted to end this, but something told him it was already too late. The fuse had been lit. The moment Emily's hand flinched near her hip, barely a movement more out of instinct than defiance, Creighton reached for his taser. David saw it happening in slow motion. The bright yellow weapon came up, center mass, aimed without hesitation. There wasn't a warning. There wasn't a pause. There was only the sharp pop of electricity, and then the world split in two. The electrodes hit Emily square in the torso. She seized instantly, her body snapping backward like a marionette whose strings had been yanked. Her eyes widened, then rolled, and a horrible sound escaped her throat, a mix between a gasp and a cry. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed hard onto the pavement, her sundress twisting up around her knees, her palms scraping the ground as her muscles spasmed uncontrollably. The sound of the taser's discharge echoed off the brick walls of the hospital. Gasps erupted from the small crowd. A woman shrieked. Someone dropped their phone. But to David, everything else went silent. He didn't hear the noise. He didn't hear Creighton's voice shouting, she was non-compliant, or the nurse calling for backup. All David could hear was a sound that didn't come from outside, it came from inside his head. A ringing, a pressure, a roar from the past. Afghanistan. The sand, the heat, the sudden chaos. The checkpoint. A young boy on a moped who didn't stop fast enough. The shot fired too quickly. The chaos that followed. A father wailing. David's squad scrambling to intervene but arriving too late to stop what had already been done. The helplessness. The gut-wrenching realization that once certain lines are crossed, there's no undoing them. He had felt powerless that day like a spectator to someone else's horror, and now here he was again. Except this time, it wasn't a stranger. It was Emily. His Emily. The woman who had held his hand through the dark nights, who learned how to apply dressings and read over medical paperwork he was too broken to look at. The woman who kept him from disappearing into bitterness, who packed lunches for him before his VA appointments and set alarms for his medications. She was lying on the pavement, twitching eyes wide with confusion and pain, and David couldn't run to her. His crutches had fallen. His leg throbbed, the phantom pain flaring in protest. But he pushed himself forward anyway, dragging himself across the asphalt on one knee, one hand, the other arm reaching for her. "Emily," he gasped. "Emily, I'm here." Creighton stood over them like he was still in control, taser, still drawn, scanning the crowd as if daring someone to challenge him. "She didn't comply," he said loudly as if rehearsing for the report. "She got aggressive. I had to subdue her." But no one believed it. Not anymore. The crowd wasn't just watching now. They were filming, some with tears in their eyes, some with disgust. A nurse rushed toward Emily, her badge flipping as she knelt beside her. Another staff member spoke into a radio with urgency. David finally reached her side. Her convulsions had stopped, but she was breathing fast, her fingers twitching, her eyes brimming with tears of pain, of embarrassment, of disbelief. And David felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there. The pain was still real. But something else now burned hotter beneath its purpose. This time he wasn't going to watch something awful happen and do nothing. This time he could act. David sat beside Emily on the pavement, his hand gently covering hers, his breath finally steadying. Around them, murmurs grew louder, nurses speaking into radios, onlookers exchanging shocked glances, and a dozen phones recording every angle of what had just happened. But amid the noise, David moved with focus, not fury. He adjusted his posture and slowly rose to one knee, balancing on the prosthetic, ignoring the dull burn in his hip and the sharp ache behind his eyes. He looked up at Officer Creighton, who was still holding the taser in a stiff grip, scanning the crowd like he wasn't sure whether he was still in control. David's voice cut through the tension like a clean blade. "I'm sorry, sir," he said low and steady, "but you just made a mistake." Creighton blinked, taken aback not by the words themselves, but by the calm conviction in them. The tone wasn't emotional. It wasn't a threat. It was worse than that. It was confident, informed, unshaken. David rose the rest of the way slowly without flinching, even as the pain in his legs screamed with every inch. "You used a weapon," David continued, "on an unarmed civilian, in a hospital loading zone, while she was aiding a disabled veteran in accessing emergency care." He said it clearly, slowly, like reading from a prepared statement. Creighton tried to interrupt, but David raised a hand just enough to silence him without shouting. "You just committed a violation of federal law. The VA Caregiver Support Act protects spouses providing aid to veterans. You interfered with medical access under duress. That alone is enough to trigger a Department of Justice review." Creighton looked around now, less confident, his eyes darting to the gathering crowd. A man in a suit was approaching from the sliding ER doors, hospital administrator by the look of him. Two uniformed officers entered the parking lot from the far end, their radios squawking faintly. David wasn't finished. "You escalated a nonviolent situation. You ignored identification. My VA card is in your pocket, which I gave you. You dismissed a medical emergency, then used force without warning. You didn't call for backup, you didn't attempt de-escalation, and you deployed a taser in front of witnesses. And cameras." Creighton's mouth moved, but no words came out. The nurses who had been watching now stood silent, arms crossed. The hospital staff formed a loose half-circle around them, some holding clipboards like shields, others visibly shaken. The two police officers finally stepped forward. "Everything okay here?" one asked cautiously. David didn't flinch. This officer just assaulted my wife with a taser during a medical emergency. You'll want to speak with the ER nurse, the security cameras, and about 20 witnesses. And I'd like a formal statement taken immediately. The administrator stepped in, adjusting his tie. I'm Mark Feldman, Director of Hospital Operations. I saw what happened on the monitors. Mr. McAllister, I assure you this will be handled swiftly and appropriately. David turned to him, his expression still calm but ironclad. Then start by getting her medical care. Now, Mark signaled to a nurse. Wheelchair now. Two orderlies rushed forward with a gurney. Emily was gently lifted off the ground, her body still trembling slightly. As they rolled her toward the ER doors, she looked back over her shoulder at David. Her eyes were glassy but full of something else, pride. David didn't move from where he stood. He looked one last time at Creighton, who was now avoiding eye contact altogether. You picked the wrong day to power trip, Sir David said, and the wrong people. Then he turned and followed the gurney through the hospital doors, leaving behind a crowd that had witnessed not a fight, but a quiet, righteous reckoning. And silence fell over the parking lot. By sunrise the next morning, the story had already spread beyond Lincoln County. The video, just under 3 minutes long, had been posted online by a teenager who'd recorded the entire incident from the edge of the parking lot. It showed everything: the argument, the taser's crackle, Emily collapsing, and David's calm but firm dismantling of Officer Creighton's authority. Within hours, it had over 20,000 shares, then hundreds of thousands more. By noon, it was on the local news. By evening, national outlets were running segments titled "Veteran Stands Tall Without Rising to Violence." But long before the headlines, consequences had begun to fall. Officer Creighton was suspended that very night pending a formal investigation. The hospital's administrator, Mark Feldman, didn't hesitate. We cannot and will not tolerate aggression toward patients or their caregivers, especially in moments of distress, he announced in a staff-wide email sent before dawn. We failed in our duty of care last night. That failure begins with accountability. The investigation didn't take long. The footage was clear. So were the witness statements, over a dozen collected from nurses, bystanders, and EMTs. Creighton's own incident report contradicted what the video showed. Within 5 days, he was formally terminated. But the hospital knew the damage couldn't be undone with a pink slip. David and Emily were invited to a closed-door meeting with the hospital board. They weren't there to seek revenge. They wanted change. David sat quietly at the end of a long table, his leg propped on a padded stool, still recovering from the flare-up of phantom pain. Emily sat beside him, arm looped through his. She let him speak first. I don't want your apology, David said, his voice steady. I want the next veteran who shows up here at midnight in pain to be treated like a human being. I want the next caregiver who dares to raise her voice for someone she loves not to end up on the asphalt. The message landed. Within 2 weeks, Lincoln County Medical Center implemented mandatory de-escalation training for all hospital security staff, including on-duty nurses and reception workers. A new protocol was launched specifically for veterans and caregivers, including priority triage access for service-related conditions and better signage for emergency parking zones. But the most significant change was the Veteran Respect and Response Policy, a code designed with input from VA counselors, former military medics, and caregivers like Emily. It emphasized trauma-informed care, proper verification of VA documentation, and outlined the exact conditions under which force may or may not be used on or near patients seeking emergency help. They named it unofficially after what David had said that night, the 6-word standard. The staff began using it internally to gauge response. Would this decision hold up if someone calmly told you, "Sir, you just made a mistake"? The phrase didn't sound threatening, but it had power. Creighton lost his badge, but what mattered more was what the community gained. A hospital that had once been cold and rigid now had a soul, not because of a lawsuit, not because of pressure, but because one man, broken and whole at the same time, stood his ground without shouting, without violence, and changed everything. In the days that followed, David found himself sleeping through the night for the first time in weeks. The phantom pain still came in waves, but something had shifted, subtle but undeniable. The fire in his missing leg no longer consumed him the way it used to. And it wasn't just the change in medication or the new VA referral to a pain specialist. It was something deeper. For the first time since the explosion in Afghanistan, David felt seen, not as a burden, not as a broken man limping through life, but as someone who still had a voice and maybe even a purpose. That moment in the parking lot when he had spoken those 6 words not out of rage, but resolve had rekindled a part of him he thought he'd lost overseas. Not the Marine uniform, not the rank or the mission, but the sense of duty to protect. This time, not in combat, but at home. Emily too changed. For years, she'd shouldered everything, quietly advocating for David at appointments, researching his conditions, fighting insurance phone trees, calming him through pain spikes. But she had always done it behind the scenes, believing her role was to hold things together, not shake things up. But that night, something in her had broken and something stronger had taken its place. She didn't regret raising her voice. She didn't regret standing toe-to-toe with a man twice her size. If anything, she felt proud. Not because she was angry, but because she had finally drawn a line between respect and silence. The public response was immediate and divided. Some comments on the video were cruel. Should have followed the rules. Just another entitled vet. But those voices were drowned out by thousands more veterans, nurses, single moms, caregivers, people who understood what it meant to be exhausted and ignored. One message stood out. It came from a stranger in Kentucky who simply wrote, "Thank you for standing up without tearing down. You reminded us what quiet courage looks like." David didn't respond to many of the messages, but he saved that one, because that's what it came down to. They hadn't wanted to make a statement. They just wanted to survive the night. But by standing their ground, by refusing to shrink in the face of disrespect, they gave people a new picture of strength, one that doesn't come from authority or weapons or shouting, but from love, from pain endured, and from the quiet kind of bravery that doesn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. The words David spoke that night, "I'm sorry, sir, but you just made a mistake," echoed far beyond that parking lot. Within days, they became a rallying cry across social media. Not shouted with rage or plastered on protest signs, but quietly shared on coffee mugs, veteran support pages, and even framed inside hospital break rooms. The phrase didn't spark outrage. It sparked reflection. It reminded people that sometimes the strongest form of resistance isn't noise. It's clarity, restraint, and unwavering dignity. Veterans groups reposted the clip, citing David's calm response as a textbook example of how moral authority looks in action. Mental health advocates praised Emily's courage and the importance of caregiver voices in crisis moments. Even a few hospitals began reviewing their security training, asking hard questions about how respect and trauma awareness could be better integrated into emergency response. But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from ordinary people, viewers like you. Some shared their own stories in the comments, stories of VA delays, miscommunications at emergency rooms, or moments when they or their loved ones were dismissed because their pain wasn't visible. Others spoke of quiet acts of bravery, caregivers who held families together through invisible wars. And many simply thanked David and Emily for reminding them that decency still matters. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Have you or someone you love ever experienced a moment where calm truth changed everything? Have you witnessed or lived through situations where veterans or their caregivers were misunderstood, overlooked, or mistreated? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's make this a space for listening and learning. If David's story moved you, consider supporting organizations that provide real assistance to veteran families, especially those offering caregiver support, PTSD counseling, and hospital staff training. Even a small donation or a shared resource can ripple out further than you think. Thank you for spending time with us and hearing this story through. Like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us to slow down, to listen closer, and to see what others often overlook. Because sometimes a whisper of truth echoes louder than any shout.